Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. Justin here. As always, thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me today to talk about this new-ish release from Second Sight Films of the brutal film Frontiers. I'm going to talk about everything about this Blu-ray. We're going to go over the movie, but before we dive into all that, I want to take just a minute or two to talk about the era in which this film came out, because this film is a French film that came out during a very specific transitional time period in horror, especially in France. The new extreme French wave that influenced Hollywood and influenced the landscape of horror as a whole, and you can't really talk about a movie like this without talking about that era, because it was extremely influential. So I want to talk about that for a couple minutes, then we'll get into my thoughts on the movie, and then we'll move into the actual release from Second Sight. It's a good release, but I have my issues with it, as I think a lot of people have. There's some frustrating aspects to this release that we'll go over. But before we get into all that, I really just want to talk about the new French Extremity Era of film, because I think it's important, and it was a really crazy time for movies, and especially horror films. The early to mid 2000s ushered in a new era of really ferocious horror movies, the kind of mean-spirited, viciously cruel movies that used a back-to-basics, practical effects-driven style that relied heavy on dark character motivations, and most importantly, extreme violence and gore. Up until that point in the early aughts, it had really been since the 70s or 80s that horror fans had really seen these kind of films come back into style. French films like High Tension and 7 Days, Irreversible, Martyrs, Inside, it was just a barrage of these films, and it spilled over into the US. The French Extremity is the reason things shifted like they did in Hollywood. Remakes like The Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I Spit on Your Grave. These films pushed the boundaries of what general audiences found palatable, with scenes depicting graphic torture, cannibalism, and oftentimes sexual violence perpetrated against defenseless women. After a pretty silly decade of horror in the 90s, with meta commentary, ensemble casting, and high concept, mass audience horror, fans wanted something that seemed less sanitized, less polished, and far less safe. So enter filmmakers like Frontiers director Xavier Gens, who began to usher in a new tide of movies designed to make you feel like you need a shower after watching them. This film was directed by Xavier Gens in his feature film debut. This was his first feature. The director was first inspired to write the film after violent riots following a controversial election in France in 2002. He took this chaotic shitstorm of a riot setting and put his characters right in the eye of the storm. We're dropped right into the action, and we follow a group of street toughs. After a heist, one of them is shot. They split up so they can get an injured dude to the hospital and reconvene at a safe spot. While one part of the group heads to get our boy to the hospital, the other group arrives at a seedy motel to hole up, and that's where shit hits the fan, and the film explodes into gory, sadistic sequences of brutal kills, horrific violence, and, oh yeah, deranged Nazi cannibals. Guys, this movie is consistently horrendous, and I mean that in the best way. Once things take a turn at that motel that I was talking about, the film takes a very swift descent into unimaginable depravity that our leads are trying to escape from. And as I'm sure you guessed, most of our characters won't make it and are killed off in full detail in some of the most inhuman ways possible. The kills are crazy in this movie. You have table saw kills, people being fucking melted, Achilles tendon cuts, dismemberment, shotgun blast. This movie has it all. For the gore hounds, you guys are going to be happy. This movie does live up to the expectations of being part of that new French extreme, because the extreme gore in this movie is wild. I'm a sucker for that stuff, so if you're in it for the kills, this movie's fantastic, but it also has some good characters and great performances to go along with it, so it's not just the gore. The movie overall is really fantastic. Some could say that the characters in the movie feel pretty thin. I think for how quickly paced this movie is and how fast it moves, I got a pretty good feel for all of these characters and their relationships to one another. It's mainly due to the performances, especially from our lead, because played by lesser actors, this movie could have felt very thin. It could have felt very surface level, especially because a lot of the narrative and the shock value of this movie is based on the gore. But I think there is a good story here, and there are good characters here. But the star of the show is definitely the extreme nature of the film and the violence and all of the gore and stuff. So let's go ahead and talk about the technical aspects of this movie, and let's get into the details of the Blu-ray. As all of Second Sight releases do, it comes with some art cards that you get, pretty high quality cards. I never know what people do with these things, if they frame them or just keep them, but it's something that these boutique labels insist on putting in here, I think maybe to justify the price. Although they're nice to look at, I'm not really sure what function they serve, unless you were able to like matte and frame these and put them on your wall or something. They're high quality prints, but I don't really know what you're supposed to do with these. As far as the book is concerned, there's lots of good behind the scenes stuff, essays. Their books, they always put thought into these and have interesting people write articles, some of the filmmakers themselves and screenwriters, so on par with the booklet as usual. There's some interesting stuff. As far as the special features, we get an audio commentary from Zoe Rose Smith and Kelly Gredner. There are a couple writers and podcast hosts that do the commentary for this one, and although the commentary is insightful and thoughtful, I much prefer commentaries by the filmmakers or people who are actually involved in the film, because although these ladies are very engrossed in extreme horror and they're big horror fans, they're critiquing the film and kind of picking it apart, and I don't think a commentary, I think content like that is best suited for podcast or for review channels like this. When I watch a commentary, I don't really want to hear people who weren't involved in the movie critiquing it. I want to hear from the filmmakers. I don't care if I'm hearing from like the fifth PA and a gaffer and a guy who worked in craft services. I want to hear from people who were on set and involved in the process. I think that you get a lot more out of it. I think if you want an opinion commentary, there's plenty of other places for that with blogs and news articles and videos. So I don't love the fact that it's not one of the filmmakers doing the commentary, but the rest of the special features provide more insight into the actual making of the film, such as Reinventing the Extreme, a new interview with director Xavier Gens. This is one of the better special features on this. He talks about how he came up with the idea for the movie, the production of the movie, the state of horror in France and in the US. It's an insightful interview, and I really dug that one. We have interviews with actor Karina Testa, the film's composer Jean-Pierre Talab, actor Maud Forget. Also, one of the better interviews in here comes from the cinematographer Laurent Beres. Talks about the actual nitty-gritty filming of this movie, using the handheld cameras and how they navigated filming the effect shot. It's actually a really great interview. We have an archive making of featurette that's awesome. The quality on it's kind of low, but it is a super in-depth, full-on documentary about the production of the film. And in that documentary, they talk a lot about the practical effects in the movie, which is some of my favorite stuff to learn about when I'm digging into the special features. So definitely a great behind-the-scenes documentary that is an archive documentary. It's not a new special feature. Then we have behind-the-scenes photos, storyboard comparisons, some of Xavier's old short films from high school, and we have the trailers. Limited edition contents, rigid slipcase with new artwork, 70-page book with new essays by Dr. Sarah Cleary, Mark H. Harris, Carolyn Morissetti, and Alexandra West, and then we have the art card. And now we're going to get into what I feel like is the biggest downfall of this release, and that is the transfer on this. Now, surprisingly, this movie was shot in 35mm. I thought for sure the reason it looks so bad is because it was shot digitally, but no, this movie was shot on film. And when you watch the cinematographer's interview here, he talks about how they used very minimal light. They were using handheld cams. If you look at the set design in the behind the scenes, it's really grimy, and there's just virtually no color in the film aside from the splashes of blood. The set design is nothing but browns and dirty grays and blacks. So not having a fresh transfer on this, and being that the film is so grimy and shot with such low light, the film just kind of looks terrible. Once you get into it and you're watching for about 20 or 30 minutes, you kind of are able to move past that and enjoy the film for what it is, but the film does not look that great. I really wish we could have got a nice 4K transfer on this, because despite the way it was filmed and lit and shot, I do think that a proper restoration could have helped the look of this film, because it almost just looks like a glorified DVD rip, like the old Lionsgate DVDs and Dimension Extreme DVDs that we got. It really has that look. Even the special features, when you watch some of them, don't even fill your whole screen. They just fill like a small section of the screen. And also another critique I will say about this is due to the fact that the cast and crew and director and everybody involved in this film is very, very French. It is kind of difficult to understand what the fuck they're saying in some of these interviews. French people have a very, very thick accent, and it is kind of hard to tell what they're saying. I really wish that they would have just taken a little bit of extra time and just put some subtitles up, because this film is going to US audiences and audiences all over the world. I had to really kind of strain to hear and rewind at times because I just couldn't understand what they were saying. It's no fault of their own. They're not from the United States. I'm from America. They're in France, so of course we have difficulty understanding one another. I think it would have helped for international audiences to subtitle these special features. But overall, it's a nice packaging. I'm glad to have this release. We did have some new features, new interviews, and things like that. So there are new aspects to this movie, including the packaging and the art cards and the booklet. So it's not a complete re-release rehash, but the transfer makes it to where if you already own the movie, on a Blu-ray or DVD, it's not gonna look much better, but if you want all the accoutrements of a second sight release and the booklet and all that stuff, I would suggest buying it. But that being said, this movie is currently not streaming anywhere, and all of the other releases, as far as the Blu-ray releases, are German releases, Digibook from Nameless, and some other releases that have the same transfer as this, which are far cheaper. You can get it for about $10 off Amazon Germany or something like that. So this is the best looking release you're probably going to be able to get for the price, unless you pay for the out of print Nameless media book or something like that. So kind of between a rock and a hard place buying this movie. If you really enjoy it, you can buy one of the older Blu-ray releases for cheaper. But if you want a fancy schmancy release with some new special features, you're going to have to go for this one. Because like I said, it's not streaming anywhere. It doesn't have another US release. So this is kind of what we have. And it is a great release. It's still available on Second Sight's website for about $40. So you can pick that up if you enjoy it. And I do recommend the film. But guys, I think we're done here. That's really all I have to say about Second Sight's release of Frontiers. Let me know what you think of Frontiers and if you picked up this release and if you plan on picking this this release up, guys. But like I said, I think we're done here. Stay weird. Remember to always be yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.